Listen live anytime online at newstalk1010.com.
It's In-Depth Radio in Toronto, News Talk 1010. Just a terrible story that developed a while ago at a hospital in Brampton. Imagine if you had a family member who had some suicidal tendencies and you wanted to make sure that he or she got through that rough patch while being supervised by people who do that sort of thing. So at the Brampton Hospital recently, there was one such individual who was supposed to be checked in on every 15 minutes. He ended up taking his own life. And that young man's name is Prashant Tiwari. And their lawyer, the family's lawyer, is the family and the lawyer obviously suing that hospital. And for more on this story, here's Michael Smitiuch. Michael, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
So can you tell us why the young Mr. Tiwari was in the hospital?
Well, he was experiencing some difficulties, some pretty significant difficulties. His father brought him to the Brampton Civic Hospital because he clearly needed help. He was having psychological difficulties. He was assessed at the hospital. He was put on a 15-minute watch because he was suicidal. And that's where the story takes a real tragic turn.
And what does a 15-minute watch mean?
It means that the nursing staff was to be checking on him every 15 minutes. And
why did they not do that night?
Well, that's what the Tiwari family are wondering. There was about a 3-hour gap in time from when a nurse last checked on him. Unfortunately, he was left with a chair in the shower area, and he was able to hang himself. So that's the serious questions that are being raised by the family to the hospital.
And listen, I think that most people would think that in this situation, that if you're there for something as serious as suicide and your expectation is that people would be checking in on you, then there would be a good case to be made that the hospital failed these people.
Well, there's no doubt they failed these people. His father brought him there because he thought he would get help. He thought he would be safe, and it turns out he wasn't. Hospitals are supposed to be a safe haven for people in circumstances like this. They're there for a specific purpose, and unfortunately in this case, it turned into a horrific tragedy.
What has the hospital said about this so far?
Well, they certainly have accounted for the fact that they've agreed that there was this time period, a significant time period when there was a lack of supervision. What we're trying to get to the bottom of, why did the system break down? Because the Tiwari family is interested not only in their son's tragic death and finding out what happened, but trying to prevent this from happening in other circumstances. And that's really what they're trying to do. One death is too many.
Now, what's ridiculous about this story is, again, this young gentleman, Mr. Tiwari, is in the hospital. The nurses are supposed to be checking on him every 15 minutes. And the reason that the nurses aren't checking in on him is?
Well, we amended the statement of claim last Thursday to allege that there was a potluck lunch going on. And I must stress, it's only an allegation that has yet to be proven in court. But that is the allegation that's been made, and it's obviously very upsetting for the family.
What are your reasons to believe that there was a potluck dinner, and that was the reason that the nurses couldn't make their rounds for 3 hours?
Well, the family's always wondered, because they've never been provided with an explanation as to why such a long absence, and that's the information that at least thus far that we've learned. But again, it's only an allegation. It's yet to be proven in court.
Is there any precedent in cases like this? Because I think the numbers are quite alarming, the number of people who die in hospital of things that, whether it's the wrong medication or any number of different things, I think sometimes people think that it's par for the course. But is there any kind of precedent for something like this?
Jim, this is a systemic problem. This isn't an isolated incident. This has happened 300 times in the last 10 years at least across Canada. And in Ontario...
So hold on again. 300 times in the last 10 years of people who were on suicide watch who the watch isn't good enough?
That's right.
And are these usually dependent on nurses or, I'm guessing, any number of different people who might work in a facility, including maybe some sort of jail, not making their rounds?
Well, we don't know the facts of every case. We know that they're supposed to be on suicide watch and they're able to take their own life, which is obviously a crisis.
What kind of area in the hospital are you in, especially in the Brampton Civic Hospital, if you're on suicide watch?
It's a specific psychiatric ward meant to be dedicated to treating and caring for individuals with these issues. We've appealed to the Chief Coroner of Ontario for an inquest. He's denied that request. The family has been left to bring what's called a judicial review application to the courts to try to force this to happen. The chief coroner thinks this is not a systemic problem. He thinks that the public interest would not be served, and it's just contrary to all the evidence.
And at any point here, again, we're talking about the death, a suicide of a young man who was in the Brampton Civic Hospital, supposed to be on suicide watch. He ends up taking his own life. Have the people at the Brampton Civic Hospital at any time spoken out to the family?
Well, they've certainly expressed their condolences, but they haven't provided an explanation to account for the 3-hour lack of supervision. And frankly, the Tiwari family has been left to their own devices because the chief coroner won't look into it. The police have yet to. We've asked them to investigate regarding charges. They've been left to their own devices to find out and explain for this 3-hour absence.
Are any of these rooms ever on any kind of, like, is it possible in a situation like this, or does it go against best practices to have somebody sitting in a room watching a wall of video screens for people who are this vulnerable?
But that's certainly an option that has been explored in other jurisdictions. There's obviously privacy issues that come into play. We're thankful that the government has finally initiated a task force to look into this issue. And so through that, we're hoping that there'll be some great recommendations that will come out of it.
All right. It's a very, very sad story. And I can't imagine your family member is in a place that you've taken that person to save them from themselves. You think that that is the safest place they could actually be when you find out that the people who you have charged with that task allegedly, aren't even doing it.
It's a parent's worst nightmare.
Michael, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
That's Michael Smitiuch, and he is a lawyer, and he's taking this case from the Tiwari family. Again, their young son, who had some suicidal tendencies, is in the hospital and ends up taking his own life. It's 3:54.